So first, just to introduce myself, I'm Phoebe, she, her pronouns. I'm a medical student at Penn and the current intern for Philadelphia Family Pride this summer. And before I introduce our first speaker, just wanted to let everyone know what tonight will look like. We'll start with a presentation from Andrea, have some questions, and then we'll move into the parent panel. This initial part of the session is being recorded for anyone who can't make it this evening, but the recording will be turned off for the parent panel, so feel free to ask whatever questions you want during that time. And I'll also send out a check-in email tomorrow to everyone who registered with any links that are discussed, and also a feedback form so we can continue to improve this session for the future. And then with that, I'm so excited to introduce Andrea, who's the founder and director of the Surrogacy Center of Philadelphia. Andrea entered the world of assisted reproductive technology over 20 years ago as a 3-time egg donor, and the experience profoundly impacted her, and she maintains contact with her recipient families to this day. And Andrea also started the Hawaii Surrogacy Center, which is the leading provider of surrogacy services in her home state. And upon relocating to Pennsylvania, she sought to provide the same warm and highly personalized service to families in the greater Philadelphia area. So with that, here is Andrea.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to put on some slides to kind of walk you through the process. Really, the main purpose of this presentation is to demystify surrogacy. We talk a lot about surrogacy as one of many family building options, but we know it can be intimidating. It is an intensive process emotionally and financially. And so I want you to get a little comfortable with it. And so my hope is that this presentation will help with that a bit. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just share my screen here. Go, and we'll just hit the slideshow here. Okay. All right, so we are demystifying surrogacy. So what is surrogacy? In this case, we are actually talking about gestational surrogacy, and that is when intended parents create embryos via IVF at a fertility clinic. The embryos are then transferred to a surrogate who's called a gestational carrier. There's no genetic relationship to the baby between the carrier and the baby that is being born. For a lot of parents, they ask, can you use donors? Yes, we just need an egg, a sperm, and a uterus. Where that all comes from is really up to you. So you can use donor ovum, you can use donor sperm, all of that can be used with IVF. The embryos are frozen, and then when they're ready, we transfer them into the carrier. There are lots of options that are available. You can be a single parent by choice. A lot of folks ask me, well, do I have to be a married couple to do this? No, you do not. You can be a single parent by choice. You can also work with a known donor. Maybe you have a family member that is offering to be a donor for you. That is actually quite common, and it also is quite cost effective. You can also even use a known carrier. Even programs like ours, even though we recruit and screen carriers and match them with families, you can have a friend or a family member go through the same process, screening process, and then an agency continue on and help you through that process as a known surrogacy journey. There are also lots of safe treatment options that are available to you if you've undergone hormone treatment. You just have to talk to your clinic about that. But I want folks to know that surrogacy is not off the table for them, that there are many options that are available, and a good agency will help you figure out and navigate all of that. So what is the role of the agency? We talk about surrogacy agencies, and what do they do besides, we know about the clinic and all of that. So why is it important to have a surrogacy agency? There are a lot of people involved in this process. Legal professionals, medical professionals, psychologists, obstetricians, delivery hospital, as well as the parties that are involved in this relationship. That's a lot to coordinate. And so a surrogacy agency should help take care of those parts and pieces and make sure that they're all working together harmoniously. And so it's really important that the agency has a good working relationship with all of these parties to really smooth things out. so that you as intended parents are not wondering, what happens next. We are really ushering you through each and every stage of the process. The agency also is important from an evaluation standpoint. Not everybody can be a gestational carrier. A lot of folks have the heart to do it, but they may not have the health to do it. It is a medical process and it has to be done safely. And so a lot of our role as a surrogacy agency is making sure that somebody can safely and successfully go through this process. Of course, there's background checks and criminal background checks and such. There's also, a psychological evaluation, but we also do a lot of medical and obstetrical evaluation to make sure that somebody can carry a baby to terms safely for you. They can also undergo the hormone protocols and other things that are involved in the surrogacy process. And finally, an agency is really good for advocating. So this is a stressful process. And because of that, sometimes relationships can be a bit strained. And so an agency can help facilitate the communication between an intended parent and a gestational carrier. They also can pull together a lot of resources, whether it's psychological support or even parenting classes when you're getting through the tail end of this process. So an agency is really important to help identify all the right community resources for you so you feel really well supported as you're going through all of this. And finally, they help managing with costs and insurance, which is a big concern for a lot of parents. Oh my goodness, we're going the wrong direction. So really, surrogacy can be broken down into 10 steps. First is identifying your team, and that means looking at different fertility clinics and other partners, whether it's egg donor agencies or surrogacy agencies, sperm donor banks, etc. Then you create your embryos and apply to programs. A lot of parents worry that right now there is a very long wait for matching with a gestational carrier. The average wait time is about a year across the nation. It used to be about 6 months. So it's doubled, particularly because of COVID. And so because of that, a lot of families say, so what happens first? Do I just wait for a whole year, then apply to a program and then make my embryos? How do I go about this? And we always tell them there are things you can do while you're waiting, and you shouldn't have to wait to, go through and match with a surrogate before you get some of these other pieces in place. So it's really important to kind of create those embryos and start applying to those programs even early on, just so that you can get on the wait list and minimize your journey time. Then there's the matching portion. It's important to think about things like communication. This is a long process, usually 15 to 18 months long at least. So you really want to like the person you're working with. And so because of that, you want to make sure that you have a very similar kind of communication style, similar expectations. You also want to kind of consider where they are. So our agency in particular focuses in the greater Philadelphia area, but there are a lot of agencies that are national in their focus. And so you have to figure out, okay, is it important to me if I want to be there at appointments, if I want to go to lunch with my surrogate at any point in time? Or maybe you say, I'm okay with that. FaceTime, Zoom, we can make it work. So all of these things are really important to understanding kind of what kind of relationship you'd like to have. So then we start moving into the legal portion of this. So there's a contract that you sign with the agency that's going to be representing you. It's important to know what's covered by that agency, what fees you're going to pay, and what happens if things do not get through the whole process. Are you going to get a refund? Are there milestone payments, etc.? It's really important to read that agreement very carefully because typically you're asked to invest quite a bit and you don't want to invest a lot and then walk away with nothing, right? So it's important to really look through that contract carefully. Then the second contract is called the gestational carrier agreement. This is the legal agreement between you and the surrogate. A lot of parents ask, okay, so is this what gives me sole legal rights to the baby when they're born? Yes and no. There are really kind of two parts to the legal piece of surrogacy. One is this contract that says, what are all your responsibilities to the surrogate? What are their responsibilities to you, financial obligations, etc. And it does state that you are the sole legal parents of the baby that is born out of this agreement. However, that's not all that we need. we do need to do something which is called a parentage order, which I will explain a little bit. But it's particularly important for a lot of our same-sex couples to make sure that they understand that just having the contract isn't enough to guarantee that you have equal sole legal rights to your baby. Once the contract is done, then the compensation that the carrier receives is put into something called escrow. If you've ever gone through a home buying process, it is similar to that. This ensures that all payments are made by a third party and a neutral party that's involved. So you should ask, who's holding my money? Because it is a lot of money that's involved. And if they are holding your money, are they licensed, bonded, and insured? How will you be notified when someone's getting paid, et cetera? So that's a very important question to ask when you go through and set up all the financial aspects of your surrogacy journey. Then once those contracts are done and everything is funded, we finally get to the medical stuff. So we have our medical protocol. The fertility clinic will be working with you and your carrier. They will do some additional evaluations, making sure that the carrier is ready to go through the process. And she will be given a protocol or a calendar to follow that has a whole variety of medications that they need to take. The cycle is monitored regularly. And usually we say it takes about 4 to 6 weeks from when we start to when that transfer is happening. And so in that period of time, the carrier is going into the clinic regularly, and you're good seeing how the entire cycle is progressing. Hopefully the first try works and the transfer is successful. If so, then we're entering the pregnancy stage. This is the fun stage of things. We can usually confirm a fetal heart rate at 4 to 6 weeks after that transfer. And the care is transferred from the fertility clinic to the regular OB. Your agency will assist with that because there are all kinds of medical releases that need to be signed to make sure that you can attend appointments, that all medical information is shared freely, but also insurance is being handled and all those bills are being taken care of, properly. Parental rights. So I had mentioned this before. So the contract's not enough, right? So what else do we need to do? You need to file for a parentage order, no matter where you live. It's the same in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and other states, but it's very important that the parentage order is filed because this is what defines and shows what your, the birth certificate with both of your names on it or just your name on it if you're a single parent by choice. It's not enough just to have your contract in place. The parental rights are granted by a family court judge, usually before the baby's even born in this area. Some other states, they grant those rights after the baby is born, but it's really kind of like an administrative hearing. You're not having to go through an entire adoption process. And some states do require that a second parent goes through a second parent adoption if they have no biological relation to the baby that is born via surrogate. So it's just important that you file for those parental rights, and of course your agency and the lawyer will assist you with that. But to make sure that as a couple, if you are a couple, that both of you have gone through that process and we have those rights codified properly. And finally, delivery day, everyone's favorite day. So the question we always get as an agency is, so do they want to keep the baby? No, it's not theirs. Delivery day, we've never had an instance of someone not turning over the baby. This is your baby. And so because of that, we always reassure parents. It's everyone's fear, but it's never happened. And so we create a birth plan with all the parties involved, outlines the expectations very clearly. We work with all the hospitals in this area. The delivery hospital will get all the documentation, the legal, the insurance paperwork, et cetera. It all goes in file, and they know it's special. So intended parents are in the delivery room, even during COVID. They've made exceptions, so you are there when your baby is born. And typically you're checking out the next day with your baby and your surrogate goes home the following day, so long as everything is stable and fine. Follow-up is really important, and your agency can provide follow-up, but as intended parents, it's also important that just because, the baby's in your arms, that relationship isn't just over. There's a lot more time, and it's important to kind of acknowledge that you've gone through something very special together. And so, yeah, so that's delivery day. So the last stuff, what about cost? This is the number one question we have. In general, you should be budgeting between $85,000 and $120,000 for the entire surrogacy process. Of that, embryo creation is going to be your biggest expense. So that IVF portion of it. And there are ways that you can reduce those costs when you're using known parties involved. That's certainly one big way to do that. Insurance is another question that we have. Most insurance plans do not cover IVF and embryo creation. Sometimes we will have some workplace benefits that will assist, but for the most part, by default, health insurance plans do not cover embryo creation. The carrier, the surrogate, their plan will cover maternity care and delivery, and then as a parent, your plan will cover baby's care after birth. So those are kind of the three parts or the three branches of the insurance that are handled. What about twins? This is another question we get very often. A lot of families decide that they just want to do this one round, aim for twins, and be done with their family building. That's fine if you want to set that as a goal, but one, there's no guarantees, and two, it does come with some risks, and it's important to discuss that with your fertility clinic and make sure that your carrier is comfortable with potentially a 2 embryo transfer that may result in twins or more. There are also some insurance implications that are important to look at, because insurance knows that twins are riskier, and therefore they are going to charge you higher premiums for some of your care. Finally, it's very important to think about, okay, what do I want out of an agency, and what do I want from this whole experience? Please think carefully about what's important to you and your family, what values are important to you, what your expectations are, because having those and understanding that as a couple, and even just within your own family values, is very important for finding the right match for you and finding the right provider matches, whether it's a fertility clinic, whether it's an agency, et cetera. And that will make the process go a lot smoother. So next steps, of course, you're welcome to contact our agency, which is Surrogacy Center of Philadelphia. But there are a lot of great referrals that you can get within the Philadelphia family community, attorneys, clinics, et cetera. We all refer to each other. We know who knows how to do this right. And so a lot of us are happy to kind of give referrals within the community. And I encourage you to talk to as many different agencies as possible, just to make sure that you find the right fit. And also talk to your peers, which is what we're going to be going into just in a minute in terms of other families that have gone through the surrogacy process, so that you feel comfortable making this decision. It's a big decision, but you should be able to gather as much information as possible before you jump in. So yeah, that's my piece. Any questions?
I can start off with a question, and also if anyone wants to add their questions in the chat, or you can direct message me if you'd prefer to have your questions asked through me, I'm happy to do that. So something that you've touched on multiple times is the importance of this being about matchmaking, both between agency and the surrogate. How do families that you've worked with tend to initiate those conversations with their partner or with themselves to figure out what their preferences are for the process?
Sure. So the way that we handle it, and I think a lot of agencies do this, is we do ask that both sides build a matching profile. Sounds a little bit like dating. It's kind of like dating, but you do build a profile, and there are questions on there about, what has been your experience building a family thus far? How did you get to this place? What are values that are important to you? What's your communication style, et cetera? And so that is asked on both sides. As you're filling out that profile and building that profile, you first turn to your partner and you discuss what those answers are. So there is a lot of that. There's kind of those personality pieces. And then there's also some of the, what we call, the harder questions. So there's the medical preference matching. So, what are your feelings on things like selective reduction? If we are faced with a birth defect, would we consider potentially termination? Would we, the COVID vaccine, that's obviously a relatively new one, but that was a big issue in terms of does an intended parent want to make sure that their carrier is fully vaccinated and boosted or not? We've had quite a bit of diversity in those answers. And so all of these are kind of part of that matching profile. And those questions can help prompt, a further discussion, because you'd be surprised. Sometimes you think you know what the answer is, and then you scratch a little bit and realize that maybe, the answer is a little bit harder than you thought. So.
Thank you so much for that answer. And that brings up another question for me. You talked about the pandemic, which was a very much unexpected event within the world, but there's lots of other unexpected events that come up. What type of resources do you recommend if there is a need for conflict management later on than the initial stages?
Sure. So when it comes to conflict management, there are a couple of options. Certainly our agency provides case managers for every case and journey. That case manager works with both sides and they're a neutral party. We don't separate it out. Some agencies will have a surrogate case manager and an intended parent case manager. We choose not to do it that way. We just have one person that's working with both parties to help kind of encourage that relationship and be a mediator if need be. But there are also professional resources. There's a good community of clinicians and psychologists and therapists that work in third-party family building that specialize in helping manage these relationships and encouraging healthy communication and healthy boundaries. And so we are always happy to refer families if they need those additional resources. Generally speaking, a case manager can handle a lot of that conflict. Again, it's usually not severe, but in case it gets a little dicey, we do also have additional kind of third-party resources that we can refer folks to.
And then we have one question coming in through the chat to ask what impact has the appeal of Roe had on surrogacy?
So yeah, of course, everybody was shocked. But at the same time, we've been ready. The policy environment and the legal environment on surrogacy is evolving. Whether it's the Roe decision or others, for instance, regarding international surrogacy. We've seen a lot of changes in terms of certain countries, either banning third-party reproduction or banning surrogacy or making it highly restrictive. And so we've always been a little flexible and ready to go. In terms of specific impacts, New Jersey as a state has clear protections for certain abortion rights. Pennsylvania does not have as clear protections, but what we've been doing as an agency is if we have had carriers that are in states with trigger laws, we do have a handful. Even though we are a local agency, we do have some carriers that reside in states like Oklahoma and Texas. In those cases, we actually do an amendment to their contract that says that the intended parents will actually cover the cost to transport a carrier out safely to a different state that will permit any kind of services that are necessary for her health or the health of their child. And so that's how we have had to manage this situation. There haven't been a lot of circumstances. And so far, that's been the solution. The lawyers that work in this area, it's a good group of third-party reproductive lawyers, and it's very collegial, and so they all have gotten their heads together in drafting some language that everyone has been inserting into the contracts, the institutional carrier agreements, to make sure that rights are protected and that we can transport someone out if need be to get the care that they need.
I would just ask an additional question to that. In the IVF process, Are there any concerns about the additional embryos that may be not used?
Right, the embryos in storage. So far, I'm waiting to see. I've been reading kind of the policy statements. There are some concerns about, okay, do we need to transport these embryos out to other locations? You know, that unfortunately happened in Ukraine with the Ukraine conflict. We actually there was a number of people involved in moving embryos for literally their physical safety. But, you know, folks are talking, okay, what happens to all the embryos in storage or embryos that are about to be tested, et cetera. So far, I haven't seen anything official yet, but in this area, you know, our clinics are on solid ground, I would say. And so far, we haven't seen any kind of concerns about those stored embryos. So. Any other questions?
I have one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned briefly about how after delivery day, the relationship with the surrogate frequently continues past that point. And I was wondering if you could speak to some of the ways you've seen that relationship evolve and what that might look like.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that in our particular program and in our agency, we do have a certain program culture. And that's one of, you know, very open and very friendly. You know, when we match folks, we make sure that we talk about what are those expectations after the baby is born, what level of contact do you want to have. We won't disqualify somebody from our program if they say, you know, I'm not really interested in continuing on, but we do tell them, look, you know, we do have a program culture of folks at least sending, you know, holiday cards and maintaining some level of contact because you've been through something so special. And it's a little, it seems abrupt for us, at least, for suddenly, thanks for the baby, I'm out of here, right? So a lot of folks do have a very friendly relationship, update their friends on social media, taking updated pictures, sending, you know, keeping in touch, talking about milestones, and everyone just has a very friendly relationship. And it's great. Sometimes the same carrier will carry a second time for a sibling journey. That happens quite often too. And so, you know, these folks have a very special relationship with each other. And I would say the vast majority of families certainly maintain a very friendly relationship. We do have some that are very close, very, very close, where their carrier is considered like an honorary auntie and a member of the family. And so it does vary. Every relationship is different, but we do encourage folks to really look at what kind of relationship they want to have after the process, because that's important. And if there's a disconnect there, it can be kind of hurtful, you know? And so we want to make sure that when we're entering into this process and going through, you know, a lot of hard times over 15 to 18 months, a lot of injections, a lot of appointments, et cetera, that once we get through it, that, you know, you do have kind of a healthy relationship on the other end. Any questions?